Hello, my name is Kathleen Smith, and I am a senior associate with the consulting firm Hazen & Sawyer. I am here today to provide an overview of the Central Ohio Regional Water Study's approach and findings for the study's entire 15-county area. The regional study evaluated the adequacy of the water resources and associated infrastructure across Central Ohio through the 2050 planning horizon. The project was conducted by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources in partnership with the Ohio Water Development Authority. The detailed modeling and analysis were conducted by the hired consulting firm Hazen & Sawyer. Data for the presentation includes an introduction to the study and its objectives, a discussion of the overall modeling approach and model input data, a description of the scenario modeling that was performed to explore multiple potential future conditions, identification of resource gaps across the 15-county area, discussion of the types of potential project options that are provided in the county-specific presentations, identification of areas of opportunity considering the availability of water supplies and infrastructure, a discussion of the study's approach to water quality considerations, and identification of other resources that are associated with this study. So let's begin with a high-level introduction to the study. The Central Ohio Regional Water Study was completed for a 15-county area, as shown on the map. The overall goal was to quantify current and future water-related needs within the region and identify areas with water-related gaps and surpluses. The study evaluated water-related needs that span drinking water supply, drinking water treatment capacity, wastewater treatment capacity, receiving water capacity, and water quality for the years 2030, 2040, and 2050. Project objectives were identified for the Central Ohio Regional Water Study. The objectives include improve, maintain, and optimize resources while planning for growth. Results of the model were used to evaluate opportunities to secure safe and reliable water supply for public use, consider reuse water for non-potable needs, and identify areas of capacity limitations. Future solutions were required to maintain beneficial use of water required for recreation, wildlife, and economic growth. Collaboration and regionalization. The project created a dashboard planning tool that will serve as a focal point for collaboration between utilities and state agencies, helping to ensure best use of both water and financial resources. Maximize funding impacts through sustainable infrastructure improvements. Using the analytic capabilities in the dashboard, state agencies can now and will in the future be able to help identify funding to build the infrastructure needed to meet the long-term needs for the region and identify future needs. The project also provides information to the state agencies on how stormwater and surface waters will be impacted by growth and development. The project can be used to identify opportunities to help mitigate impacts of development on the environment. Now, let's discuss model architecture and the types of data that were leveraged to inform modeling efforts. An integrated water resources model was developed to evaluate the available water supply, water demands, wastewater demands, and other uses of water throughout the region. The integrated model includes several components that are all connected to one another, as outlined in this graphic. Surface water, along with reservoirs and groundwater supply, feed either directly to water demands or feed a water treatment plant. That water treatment plant, in turn, supplies treated water to meet water demands, including the local population, golf courses, industries, and a myriad of other users. A portion of the water demands then go to a wastewater treatment plant, where the water is treated and returned to surface water or groundwater supplies. The water resources model developed for this project includes current and projected water demands by type throughout the central Ohio region and determines if there is sufficient supply and/or infrastructure capacity to meet those demands. If demands exceed supply and/or infrastructure availability, those insufficiencies are marked and quantified. Let's start with a closer look at how groundwater and surface water supplies were estimated. It was estimated at the Huck 10 watershed level, the size of a hydrologic area used in the model. To explain, Huck stands for Hydrologic Unit Code, and the 10 stands for the number of digits. The U.S. Geological Survey has delineated each of the watersheds in the country and assigned them a specific number based on their location, similar to a zip code. The system identifies drainage areas into regions, which are 2 digits, subregions, 4, basins, 6, subbasins, 8 digits, watersheds, 10 digits, and subwatersheds, which are 12 digits. The map reflects the Huck 10 watershed level with black boundaries. For each Huck 10 watershed, the average daily sustainable groundwater availability was estimated based on the Huck 10's overall high yield areas and long-term recharge rates. It is important to note that in reality, groundwater is not uniformly available across a given Huck 10, as shown by the shaded area in the map. The shaded area reflects the high yield areas of the 15-county region with differing levels of recharge. For the purpose of modeling, however, one daily groundwater availability estimate was generated per Huck 10, and all users within that Huck 10 are assumed to have equal access to that supply, regardless of where they are located within the Huck 10. Overall, there is approximately 520 million gallons per day of available groundwater across the 15-county area, with individual Huck 10s ranging from 500,000 gallons per day to 40 million gallons per day of groundwater supply. There are a few disclaimers about the groundwater approach that should be noted. First is scale. This study estimates total groundwater availability in each Huck 10 watershed as a single value, which makes its predictive capability only suitable for very large-scale assessments. The results are not suitable for site-specific analysis or any groundwater investigations besides those at a regional or sub-regional scale. Delineation. Aquifer boundaries do not always coincide with overlying surface water systems. In this study, groundwater boundaries are defined by surface watersheds, and consequently, some aquifers may be split by unsuitable borders. This may lead to unexpected or misleading results, especially near watershed boundaries. Uncertainty. Groundwater maps and studies always involve a high degree of uncertainty due to the complex nature of aquifers and the lack of widespread, reliable data sets of aquifer characteristics and water level information. While this is not unique to this study, its scale and time frame make its groundwater availability estimates especially uncertain. Site-specific groundwater investigation could mitigate these uncertainties. Surface water availability was estimated by way of a US EPA stormwater management model, oftentimes abbreviated as a SWIM model. Daily values of surface water availability across subcatchments were estimated based on precipitation, temperature, and land cover characteristics, including impervious areas. A more detailed discussion of the SWIM model is provided in a separate presentation. Land use data was provided by the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Land use categories were assigned to match the National Land Cover Database categories. The two endpoints of land cover characteristics assumed in the SWIM model are shown here. The image on the left reflects the base year land use, and the image on the right reflects 2050 land use. For the modeled 2030 and 2040 conditions, interpolated conditions between the base year and 2050 endpoints were used. Surface water inflows into streams were estimated at the subcatchment level. This map shows subcatchments in fine black outlines. Modeled streams are shown in blue. Wastewater discharges into and water withdrawals from these streams are also included in the overall integrated water resources model. The integrated water resources model includes all permitted water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants in the 15-county region. The location, source water, permitted capacity, and activity of water treatment plants were informed by permits and Ohio Department of Natural Resources withdrawal capacities, historical production data, master plans, and consumer confidence reports. The location, discharge protocol, permitted capacity, and activity of wastewater treatment plants were informed by National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, permits, historical discharge data, and master plans. In addition to existing water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants, the model includes assumed changes to facilities across the 2050 planning horizon. The table at the top of this slide shows the assumed water treatment plant changes, including expansion of the Johnstown Water Treatment Plant in 2030, expansion of the Licking Regional Water Treatment Plant in 2030, and the newly constructed Home Road Water Treatment Plant being online in 2030. The second table shows the assumed wastewater treatment plant changes, which includes expanded facilities, new facilities, and decommissioned facilities. If any of these assumed infrastructure projects change in terms of capacity and/or timing, those changes can be reflected in future model updates. It was also assumed that in 2040, the two planned additional upground off-stream reservoirs adjacent to the Scioto River would be online and operational. Let's discuss the different types of water demands that are included in the model and how they are projected to change over time. First, let's dive into the non-municipal demands and then later discuss municipal demands as part of scenario modeling. A major component of the Central Ohio Regional Water Study is the inclusion of current and projected future industrial demands. Demands for industrial cooling water have increased in the area in recent years, including cooling water demands for data storage and processing centers. Industrial cooling demands have seasonal variability and need more water in the hotter months, as shown on the graph on the bottom right. The dark blue line shows typical water use patterns for an industrial cooling site, and the light blue line shows the typical resultant blowdown or wastewater production. These industrial sites are assumed to expand over time, increasing the water and wastewater demand for this sector. The table and graphic on the right show the assumed water use from a single site with cooling towers. Factors that affect water usage include site location, daily temperatures, water quality, and operations. Discussions with data partners and study stakeholders, industrial demands in the Central Ohio Regional Water Study were estimated to increase by 120% by 2050. Industrial cooling demands were assumed to be served by specific utility providers based on proximity or any known agreements. The graph shows the projected industrial water demand from 2021 to 2050 for the 15-county region. The table shows the utility providers that are assumed to serve industrial cooling demands. For example, the City of Columbus is assumed to provide water to 28 of the current and forthcoming industrial demands based on location and any known service agreements. The Ohio State University was consulted about assumed increases in future agricultural irrigation water demands. It is estimated that by 2040, agriculture fields will need at least 5 inches of irrigated water during the critical growing season, which occurs between July and September. Based upon this information, the team reviewed future land use to identify where agricultural fields are expected to be in 2040 and 2050, and calculated the water demand that would be needed for 5 inches of irrigation across those agricultural fields. These irrigation demands are present for the 2040 and 2050 condition and are assumed to use groundwater for source water. Using the aforementioned approach to estimating future agricultural irrigation demands on groundwater, agricultural demands are estimated to increase from approximately 12 million gallons per day in the base year in 2030 to 110 million gallons per day in 2040 and 2050 during the growing season of July through September across the 15-county region. No agricultural irrigation is assumed to take place from October through June. Now I would like to discuss some of the model input data that varies depending on the future conditions we want to use. We have employed scenario modeling in this study, so one might evaluate the sufficiency of supplies and infrastructure under a range of potential future conditions. When analyzing future conditions, current data is projected from the present to the future in time. With that projection comes uncertainty, which is why analyzing multiple potential future scenarios can provide more resiliency and reduce the risk of failure. Scenario planning acknowledges there are several plausible future conditions that may occur and allows planning for several possible future conditions. On the left side of the cone, there is only one point because current conditions are known. As time goes on, the cone of uncertainty expands and the range of possible future conditions widens. The widening could indicate divergence among the scenarios and changes in the recommended project that aligns with that scenario. Analyzing several scenarios or plausible futures helps ready the region for ending up in future A, B, or C, and knowing the projects to implement all along the way. 4 model scenarios were developed to define the range of potential futures. Scenario conditions that were explored were 2 different precipitation and temperature changes and 2 different population estimates, totaling 4 different model scenarios. The different inputs of these scenarios will be explored further on the following slides. Two population sources were used for the scenario modeling. The expected growth trend was informed by the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, or MORPC. The MORPC population projections were informed by local zoning and land use plans. The historical growth trend was informed by the Ohio Department of Development, or ODOD. The OD/OD population projections are informed by historical birth, death, and migration trends. The population projections were used to estimate the future increases in municipal water demands and private water system demands over time. The bar chart shows the different county-level growth rates between 2020 and 2050 for the two population projections. The MORPC population projection is higher than the Ohio Department of Development population projection, thus meaning that the projected municipal and private system water demand are also higher for the MORPC scenarios. These two images show the projected percent change in population across the 15-county area for the two population projections considered in our model scenarios. On the left, you see that the Ohio Department of Development projects areas of population growth and decline, whereas the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission on the right mostly shows population growth or no change. These two images are showing population distribution in terms of number of people per quarter-mile grid. When looked at in this way, the two population projections look more similar, with population being largely concentrated in the center of the study area, with some scattered, densely populated areas around it. The two different population projections were combined with current per capita water use rates across the 15-county area to estimate future water demands. This approach means that municipal water demands and private water system demands increase as a function of population. The graph shows both population projections result in an overall increase in the total municipal demands for the study area. The historical growth trend, which is informed by the Ohio Department of Development or OD/OD population projection, shows a 9% increase in demands by 2050. The expected growth trend, which is informed by the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission or MORPC population projection, shows a 28% increase in demands by 2050. There is an approximate 25 million gallon per day difference in the total municipal water demands projected for 2050. In addition to the two water demand endpoints, the other axis of our scenarios is assumed availability of surface water supplies, which is dictated by our assumed temperature and precipitation conditions. Historical precipitation and temperature data from 1983 through 2022 were used to estimate the surface water runoff and evaporation. For the future conditions, change factors were applied to the historical precipitation and temperature data to analyze the effects it may have on surface water availability. Temperature and precipitation changes were based on the global climate model data, downscaled to the central Ohio area. There are different change factors for each month and future planning year, 2030, 2040, and 2050. Change factors were extracted from an ensemble of global climate models from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Two scenarios conditions were selected for evaluation for future conditions: a moderate climate scenario and a hot and dry scenario. The moderate change scenario represents the middle of the road and utilizes the 50th percentile change factor for both temperature and precipitation from the ensemble of global climate model data. The top left graph shows the 50th percentile change factors for precipitation, and the bottom left graph shows the 50th percentile change factors for temperature. As can be seen, there is a greater change projected for temperature over the planning horizon. The extreme change scenario that was modeled is the hot and dry scenario, which utilizes the 5th percentile change factor for precipitation and the 95th percentile change factor for temperature. The top right graph shows the 5th percentile change factors for precipitation, and the bottom right graph shows the 95th percentile change factors for temperature. A scenario with no future temperature and precipitation change factors was also evaluated. Revisiting our 4 model scenarios, you see that they differ in terms of either the assumed population projection and thus water demand projection, or the assumed temperature and precipitation condition and thus surface water supply availability. The intense pressure scenario includes extreme temperature and precipitation change factors, therefore hot and dry conditions, and the expected growth trend for projected demands. The full speed ahead scenario includes the more moderate temperature and precipitation change factors, so more surface water availability, but still remains the expected growth trend for projected demands. The resource abundance scenario includes the more moderate temperature and precipitation change factors, but includes water demands associated with the historical growth trend. Lastly, the easy does it scenario includes the extreme temperature and precipitation change factors with the historical growth trend water demands. Raw water supply and infrastructure insufficiencies, or gaps, were identified for each of the 4 model scenarios. Let's start off by discussing the definition of a gap. Gaps were defined based on the node type. For surface water nodes, it is identified as a gap if it is ever not able to meet all of the demands put on it, thus resulting in a shortage. For a reservoir node, it is identified as a gap if its water level ever reaches 20% or less of its usable storage. For a groundwater gap, it is identified as a gap if the remaining groundwater availability for a Huc 10 ever reaches 0. Water treatment nodes are identified as gaps if minimum month production reaches 80% or more of its permitted capacity. Wastewater treatment plant nodes are identified as gaps if maximum annual average flow reaches 100% or more of its permitted capacity. The dashboard planning tool that was created as part of the study allows users to select model conditions on the left and view resultant gaps on the map. The size of a red node reflects the magnitude of the gap. For the model conditions selected here, a total of 56 gaps are shown. This table summarizes resource gaps for the entire 15-county study area for each model scenario and year. There are at most 64 gaps, which pertains to the intense pressure scenario in 2050. Identified gaps mostly pertain to the availability of water and wastewater treatment infrastructure, as indicated by the high numbers in the water treatment plant and wastewater treatment plant columns, as compared with the lower numbers in the groundwater, reservoir, and surface water columns. The model scenario that our project team has focused on in each of the county-specific presentations is the full speed ahead scenario, which includes the expected growth trend and moderate temperature and precipitation conditions in 2040. This scenario year and temperature change was chosen as the middle ground planning scenario, as future growth is more certain and can be addressed with planning projects, while temperature and precipitation changes are close to existing data but are the median for global climate models and avoid temperature and precipitation extremes that could impact planning outcomes. Let's more specifically explore the gaps in each of these column categories, starting with groundwater gaps. As a reminder, groundwater nodes are identified as gaps if the remaining flow in a given HUC 10 ever reaches zero. For the full speed ahead 2040 conditions, there are a total of 10 groundwater gaps. 5 of these gaps are driven by our assumed increase in agricultural irrigation. Gaps with an agricultural driver are marked with a bright green indicator. 3 of these gaps are driven by our assumed increase in industrial demands, all marked by a dark green indicator. Only 3 groundwater gaps are driven by municipal growth, which are marked with a pink indicator. As an example of gap magnitude in the dashboard, if you click on this one groundwater node in Logan County, the planning dashboard will show you that this groundwater supply has a maximum month projected shortage in 2040 and 2050 of more than 8 million gallons per day, as shown in the graph on the bottom right. It should be noted that several non-municipal water demands in the 15-county study area represent quarry dewatering operations. Quarry dewatering withdrawals are unique demands that only exist because groundwater is present. If groundwater were not there, the demand would not have to be met. The unique nature of quarry dewatering demands is recognized within the model. These existing demands are assumed to remain constant over the planning horizon. They are served by groundwater, but only after all other demands on that groundwater node are met. If existing quarry dewatering demands cannot be met by remaining groundwater supply, the shortfall does not contribute to any calculated shortage for that groundwater node because quarry dewatering demands are not those that need to be met. Moving on to surface water supplies. A surface water node is shown as a gap if a shortage is observed in the model simulation period. A total of 7 surface water gaps were identified for the full speed ahead 2040 scenario. All 7 of these identified gaps are driven by municipal growth. Again, to further explore the magnitude of these gaps, let's click on a surface water node in the dashboard. This node here in Licking County shows a maximum month shortage of approximately 1.5 million gallons per day in 2040, meaning that our precipitation, temperature, and demand conditions throughout the model simulation period, the maximum month demand cannot be met is approximately 1.5 million gallons per day due to insufficiencies in this surface water supply, as shown on the graph in the bottom right corner. There are 2 reservoir nodes that were identified as gaps for the full speed ahead 2040 model conditions, both of which are located in Perry County. Reservoirs are identified as a gap if their projected water level ever reaches 20% or less of the total usable storage. These 2 gaps occur in the base year and in all subsequent planning years due to the sensitivity of these reservoirs to dry conditions. Water treatment plants are identified as gaps if their maximum month production exceeds 80% of permitted capacity. 19 water treatment plants were identified as gaps in the 2040 full speed ahead model scenario. 12 of those 19 water treatment plant gaps are driven by assumed growth in industrial demands. The water treatment plant gaps with an industrial driver are marked with a dark green indicator. The water treatment plant gaps with a municipal driver are marked with a pink indicator. To explore the magnitude of these water treatment plant gaps, let's click on this water treatment plant in Union County. It is the Marysville Water Treatment Plant 2, which has a 2040 capacity of 4 million gallons per day. The projected demand on this plant in 2040 is estimated to be 9.5 million gallons per day, thus meaning there is a treatment capacity shortage of 5.5 million gallons per day. Wastewater treatment plants are identified as GAPs if the projected maximum annual average flow is 100% or more of its permitted capacity. In the 2040 full speed ahead scenario, 18 wastewater treatment plants were identified as GAPs, 14 of which are driven by municipal growth. The two largest GAPs are those pertaining to the Southerly Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Jackson Pike Wastewater Treatment Plant. Together, these two facilities have a combined wastewater treatment capacity of 182 million gallons per day, and in 2040, the projected combined wastewater flow to these two facilities is 235 million gallons per day, thus resulting in a treatment capacity gap of 53 million gallons per day. This table provides a full summary of the GAPs in the Full Speed Ahead 2040 model scenario by county. GAPs are divided by their respective driver for occurrence. A substantial fraction of identified GAPs, 19 out of 56, are attributed to the assumed industrial growth. The 2040 Full Speed Ahead scenario resulted in the identification of 56 resource GAPs. These GAPs spanned groundwater, surface water, reservoirs, water treatment plants, and wastewater treatment plants. Of these 56 GAPs, only 11 were determined to have a gap magnitude of 2 million gallons per day or more. The table shown here summarizes those larger magnitude GAPs with their respective causes. In the county-specific presentations, project options are provided for every identified resource gap in the 2040 Full Speed Ahead scenario. The project focused on identification of opportunities and strategies to fill those resource or infrastructure gaps. Gaps can be filled through a variety of ways depending on the type of gap. For example, a supply gap could be filled by constructing a reservoir or implementing a policy to restrict use during times of low supply availability. Other solutions include expanding treatment capacity and leveraging reuse water. Gaps are often filled with a project or a set of projects. A gap or set of gaps can be filled a variety of ways and can exist across some or all scenarios. A scenario scorecard was developed to assess the favorability of a project used to fill a gap. 5 scorecard criteria were developed to evaluate projects compared to each other as indicated on this slide. Scenario applicability assesses if that project will fill a gap across one or more scenarios. The more scenarios it addresses, the better. Similarly, but a little different, within the same scenario, a project that fills more gaps is more favorable. Life cycle costs are another important consideration. The total life cycle costs include construction, operation and maintenance, and other projected costs. Water quality impact considers impacts associated with development, as well as changing water and wastewater use. A project that provides higher protections to water quality ranks higher. Finally, a project with a shorter implementation time would be considered more favorable since the benefits of that project would be realized sooner. Projects were selected to provide solution strategies for the 2040 full speed ahead scenario. Resource gaps for this scenario can be further explored using the dashboard. The dashboard facilitates scenario planning and the ability to view gaps in other scenarios to determine the resiliency of project options. Generally, the provided solutions satisfy gaps beyond the 2040 full speed ahead scenario. Pre-planning level projects are provided as examples and possible solutions to fill gaps in each of the county level presentations. Additional efforts are needed to define, plan, and implement a project as outlined in next steps. Projects were categorized by type. First, local, where the utility largely uses its own assets to fill a gap or an industry provides its own on-site solutions. Then regional, where the utility collaborates with other utilities, or reuse, where the utility leverages reuse water to provide non-potable water to an industrial user to reduce potable water demand. In addition to identifying resource gaps, the 15-county Central Ohio model can support the identification of areas of opportunity based on excess resource availability. To analyze potential areas of opportunity within the study area, supply and infrastructure capacities were assessed. First, the team identified groundwater and surface water supplies with greater than 1 million gallons per day of remaining supply after meeting demands for the maximum monthly average in the base year and 2040. Then, the team identified water treatment plants with greater than 1 million gallon per day remaining capacity after meeting demands for the maximum monthly average in the base year in 2040. Then they identified a subset of the water treatment plants with available capacity that also have sufficient supply. The final step of the analysis was to identify the wastewater treatment plants with greater than 0.3 million gallons per day of remaining capacity after meeting demands for the maximum month in the base year and 2040. Then they identified the subset of the wastewater treatment plants with available capacity that also serve areas with sufficient supply and water treatment plant capacity. After the analysis was completed, 5 areas were identified as potential areas of opportunity by meeting the following criteria. Available water supply was greater than 1 MGD. The supply connected to a water treatment plant with available remaining capacity of greater than 1 MGD, and the water treatment plant was connected to a wastewater treatment plant with available remaining capacity greater than 0.3 million gallons per day. These 5 areas of opportunity are Aqua Ohio in Marion, Granville, Pickaway Correctional, Chillicothe, and Johnstown after the assumed 2030 water treatment plant expansion. Some areas did not meet the initial criteria but may also have opportunity after further evaluation. These areas are Washington Courthouse. It did not meet the original criteria because it did not have sufficient groundwater availability, but the upground reservoirs have ample storage. Earnhardt Hill Regional initially did not meet the water treatment plant remaining capacity criteria. However, the projected available remaining water treatment plant capacity is 0.99 MGD, which is just under the criteria threshold. Canal Winchester also did not initially meet the water treatment plant remaining capacity criteria. However, the projected available remaining water treatment capacity is 0.99 MGD, which again is just under that criteria threshold. The Columbus wastewater treatment plants, Jackson Pike and Southerly, have high wet weather peaking factors that cause their annual average demands to be above their current capacity. But Columbus meets their permitting requirements, and so there still may be opportunity to treat additional base flows through conveyance and/or small capital improvement projects. Westerville has sufficient groundwater supply and surface water supply from Alum Creek allocation and the Westerville Reservoir. The Delco Olentangy plant may have opportunity with the Olentangy upground reservoirs to store water and meet future demands, but further analysis is needed and a corresponding wastewater treatment plant would need to be established. This next section will present the project findings relative to projected water quality across the planning horizon. While the Central Ohio Regional Water Study was primarily focused on water supply and treatment capacity, the models developed were also used to project potential impacts to water quality that may occur due to changes in population, land use, infrastructure, and temperature and precipitation over the next 25 years. The goals for the water quality assessment were to: first, characterize existing water quality conditions. The study identified watersheds with the highest existing water quality. Such pristine watersheds were considered to be the most sensitive to future development. 2. Determine potential impacts. The study developed potential impact factors based on available data and the suite of possible future scenarios, including those evaluated for water supply and treatment. 3. Watersheds were characterized as having higher or lower potential for impacts based on the identified impact factors. The scenarios use a range of future conditions, so the intent here is to illustrate where it is more likely water quality impacts will occur given the uncertainty over the exact future conditions that will happen. And 4. Provide recommendations and activities that could be completed by local agencies, utilities, and organizations to help offset, mitigate, and protect against water quality degradation. The graphic illustrates the approach to characterizing existing water quality and understanding the potential for future impact. Those watersheds with both high existing quality and high potential for future impacts should be considered as highest priority for action. Watersheds throughout the region were characterized using the following 3 metrics. First, quality of aquatic habitat. This is a standardized metric for measuring the quality of aquatic habitat at a specific location within a stream. The average QHEI score in a watershed was calculated to determine the overall aquatic habitat score. Targeted water quality standards. The aquatic life use designation, as well as anti-degradation tiers, provide a listing of streams that are targeted to remain high quality. These are assigned by stream reach for each watershed. The reach categorizations for anti-degradation and aquatic use designations were evaluated to determine an overall categorization at the watershed level. And finally, stream biological health. The Ohio EPA has performed modeling to estimate the potential biological health of headwater streams based on land use factors and desktop analysis. This modeling generated an estimate for all of the headwater streams in each watershed. A summary categorization of the results was applied to each watershed based on all of the stream reaches within its boundary. Given the above factors, an overall water quality category was applied to each HUC 12 watershed, ranging from poor to excellent. For the 15-county region, the majority of the watersheds scored as good or excellent, with a few small exceptions. The dashboard can be used to provide additional details on existing water quality characterization for each HUC 12 watershed. Four factors were used to determine the potential for future impacts to water quality. Land use. The population and land use projections provided by MORPC were used to estimate the overall change in the percent imperviousness of the watershed as estimated to occur by 2030, 2040, and 2050. Literature data has shown that increased impervious area in a watershed is typically correlated with decreasing water quality. As impervious area increases, the overall stream water quality tends to decrease. Hydromodification. When streams see higher flows and/or more frequently occurring storm events, stream banks may experience increased erosion. With these flow changes, streams may become incised and disconnected from floodplains, resulting in a decrease in water quality and an increase in suspended solids. Increased occurrence of low flows. During dry weather conditions, healthy streams may typically maintain base flows to support aquatic life. If the low flow periods are extended or flows are projected to be lower under future conditions, it could have a negative impact on water quality due to the loss of aquatic habitat and could therefore lead to more restrictive permitting requirements. And temperature and precipitation. Changes in temperature and precipitation were considered in multiple scenarios. The stream model was again used to evaluate the impact of temperature and precipitation conditions on impacts during low flows. In some watersheds, the impact of temperature and precipitation on stream flows was found to be more significant due to lower flows during dry conditions that are not able to be offset through either wastewater treatment plant effluent or increased runoff. All of the potential future water quality impacts will be available for review on the project dashboard. This includes projected changes in land use and the potential for impacts related to hydromodification, low flows, and temperature and precipitation. These potential impacts to water quality can be viewed at the 15-county level or at the individual HUC 12 level. Following the evaluation of future impacts, the watersheds with excellent water quality and highest potential for negative water quality impacts can be identified. All of the impacts can be examined against existing water quality. For example, the subset of watersheds with overlap of excellent existing water quality and projected land use changes were identified. These represent the watersheds that have the most potential for water quality impacts. There are watersheds where there are predicted to be substantial changes in land use over the next 25 years, and the existing water quality is excellent, with the potential for degradation to occur. The evaluation was completed for HUC 12 watersheds, but it is also examined at the HUC 10 watershed level to better understand regional and larger watershed implications and potential policies. A total of 5 HUC 12s were scored as having excellent water quality and a relatively high percentage of impervious area addition by 2050. These are located in Licking, Madison, and Pickaway counties. These watersheds represent the intersection of excellent existing water quality and potential for future impacts. It is important to understand that stream systems are constantly changing due to a number of factors, including vegetative communities, adjacent land uses, and changing temperature and precipitation. The magnitude of change over the next few decades will vary across the region and is subject to a number of variables. Based on the findings of this study, there are some key locations that would benefit from prioritized protections. Opportunities for conservation and water quality protection should be considered across all watersheds. Existing high-quality watersheds should be given priority for protection due to the enhanced ecological benefits that they provide. 10 HUC 10 watersheds were identified that contain HUC 12s, both indicators of excellent existing water quality and HUC 12s with relatively high projected change in impervious area in 2050. This is essentially an expansion of watershed area from HUC 12 to HUC 10. of the previous slide. 4 watersheds are located in mainly Licking County and the Licking River watershed. 3 Big Darby Creek watersheds are included in the watersheds with additional protection under the Ohio Construction General Permit Appendix A. 2 watersheds include the segments of the Scioto River and local tributaries south of the confluence with the Olentangy River in Franklin County and Pickaway County. The last watershed is the middle section of Deer Creek in Madison, Pickaway, and Fayette counties. The map shows the watersheds listed in the table highlighted, with a gradient showing the change in impervious area projected in 2050. Watersheds with existing excellent water quality indicators are masked in red hatching. Water quality may be protected alongside economic development if the proper protections are in place prior to development and significant land use changes. 4 categories of solutions should be considered, including policy, partnerships, data, and funding that could be used to help offset or mitigate any potential future water quality impacts. Routine review of local ordinances. Local ordinances should be revisited on a routine basis to ensure they adequately address the changes the region is facing. In general, policies should be revisited on a routine basis to ensure they align with one another, are well supported with responsibilities delegated appropriately, and adequately protect natural resources. Riparian setbacks protect riparian buffers that reduce runoff and pollutants. Floodplain requirements ensure adequate space is available during storm events for systems to overflow their banks without flooding infrastructure. Stormwater management plans lay out best management practices for reducing stormwater runoff. Zoning and planning codes restrict development to certain areas, and in doing so, can be used to protect valuable resources. Tree codes can encourage strategic planting of native and temperature and precipitation resilient trees, which compose riparian buffers and promote stormwater infiltration rather than runoff. Fee rates established for the Planning Commission and the Soil Water Conservation District should be reviewed to ensure they adequately support proper review. These ordinances may be implemented at various levels, in which case a designated authority should be tasked with inventorying where the policies are and are not in effect, and to encourage collaborative efforts. Local agencies should push to have non-point source implementation strategy or NPSIS plans in place as early as possible. NPSIS plans are defined at the HUC 12 watershed level. There are 28 HUC 12 watersheds which have an Ohio EPA approved NPSIS plan in place. Depending on when TMDL plans are estimated to be complete, there may be a need to consider fast-tracking NPSIS plans in order to be eligible for 319 funding and to help define and prioritize projects. The NPSIS is a living strategic planning document that summarizes causes and sources of impairment, establishes critical areas, identifies quantifiable objectives to address causes and sources of impairment, and describes projects designed to meet those objectives. The NPSIS is designed to evolve as projects come and go and will need to be reevaluated periodically, similar to the regulations mentioned above. And MS4 compliance. NPDES permits are routinely updated. Every 10 years, urban areas are redefined by the Ohio EPA based on census data, and the next census will be coming in 2030. Communities need to be prepared if they are close to reaching that threshold. Consider eventual need for separating permit administrative duties as communities approach the urban area definition. Consider adopting additional regulations for areas experiencing rapid development that are not within a defined urban area. Ensure plans and resources are in place to support adequate preparation and review of an increased number of PTI and NOI applications. Ensure resources are in place to support an increased number of SWIP reviews and construction site inspection. Educate communities on grant funding and other mechanisms available to support compliance with local water quality initiatives. MS4 communities can leverage a NPSIS plan to meet permit requirements by identifying watershed-specific strategies and projects that improve water quality. The partnerships mechanism involves pooling resources with other agencies and stakeholders. Encourage local agencies to meet routinely with their area partners. Routine meetings allow agencies to stay informed on trends, projects, and upcoming plans, fostering a coordinated approach to water management. Involve or offer guest speakers to learn about new opportunities, trends, and lessons learned. Bringing in experts can introduce innovative solutions, funding opportunities, and best practices to improve local water initiatives. Engaging with the public builds awareness, encourages local participation, and strengthens community support for water quality initiatives. Further encourage partnerships to collaborate on NPSIS plan development. Currently, 28 out of 319 HUC 12 watersheds have an Ohio EPA approved NPSIS. 319 funding can be used for NPSIS plans. For additional water quality protection mechanisms, focus on data collection and monitoring, as well as leveraging available funding sources. This includes support and continue monitoring programs. Continue monitoring programs and encourage any support for local monitoring data collection. This includes water quality data collection, stream characterization and evaluation, as well as tracking development and land use changes. Leverage grant programs. Leverage State of Ohio grant programs for support on water quality initiatives. Grant initiatives include Clean Ohio, Water Resource Restoration Sponsor Program, H2 Ohio, and 319 grant funding. Prioritize infrastructure upgrades. Focus and prioritize utilizing infrastructure to address current or near-term gaps to help preserve water quality. In addition, monitoring changing temperature and precipitation conditions and water usage patterns will help to provide valuable information when examining water supply availability and potential water quality concerns. Supporting regional opportunities will also have benefits to water quality. Incentivize sustainable practices. Encourage and incentivize green infrastructure and redevelopment in local development. These practices can help to slow down and infiltrate water locally, supporting local groundwater recharge, as well as reducing downstream hydromodification. This concludes the overview of the 15-county Central Ohio Regional Water Study. For additional information, please refer to the Central Ohio Regional Water Study website hosted by the Ohio EPA. On the website, you can find county-level presentations with recorded readings, detailed technical presentations, and the planning dashboard with video tutorials.